Good morning. It is Monday, February the 28th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch and Hayek's prize. All that and more when I get back. Thank you. And now the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for February 28th. The blood of my Son breaks the power of sin and iniquity. I am light, and in me there is no darkness at all. You cannot walk in darkness and have fellowship with me. But the blood of my Son, Jesus, has purified you all from sin, enabled you to walk in my light and to have fellowship with me. Trust in my Son's sacrifice of blood, for if you will confess your sins, I will be faithful and just and will forgive you all your sins and purify you from all unrighteousness. Do not fear what the accuser of my servants can do to you, for you have been given the power to triumph over him through the blood of the Lamb and by the word of your testimony. Hold fast to your testimony about the power in the blood of my Son, Jesus. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 through 22, 1 John chapter 1, verses 5 through 7, Revelation chapter 12, verses 10 through 12. Prayer declaration: I have boldness to enter into your presence through the blood of your Son. I have received deliverance through your blood, and it gives me victory. I rebuke Satan, the accuser of the brethren, through the blood of Jesus. I command all my accusers to depart, and I rebuke and cast out all spirits of slander and accusation. And that was the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for February 28th. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is the person that has the courage of his convictions and is confident in what he knows. He is the person that understands that cultural conservatism is more important than political conservatism. He is not selfish, but minds his own business. He acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He expresses what he knows and does so with certainty. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he's better than the socialist. He's a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. You have to know that. If you don't know with every fiber of your being that being a true conservative is best, then you're wasting your time. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. Economics is haunted by more fallacies than any other study known to man. This is no accident. The inherent difficulties of the subject would be great enough in any case, but they are multiplied 1,000-fold by a factor that is insignificant in, say, physics, mathematics, or medicine: the special pleading of selfish interests. Henry Hazlitt. This may be the best explanation as to why economics seems to be so much more vulnerable to error than all other academic disciplines. Not only is economics wrongly viewed as a data science in contemporary times, thereby losing its integral connection to human action, but economics is exponentially more susceptible to the manipulation of special interests who would bastardize it in a second for crony ends. I am sure all disciplines are subject to some degree of this, but none have quite the monetary stakes that nefarious actors would extract from the subject of economics. And that was, there's no free lunch. Thank you. And now, Hayek's prize. The increasing veneration for the state, the admiration of power and of bigness for bigness' sake, the enthusiasm for organization of everything, we now call it planning, and that inability to leave anything to the simple power of organic growth are all scarcely less marked in England now than they were in Germany before the Nazi seizure of power. How Friedrich Hayek despaired as he wrote those foreboding words in 1942 and 43. He had fled his native Austria for Britain, homeland of the Gladstonian liberalism he revered, only to discover that 19th century individualism was nearly as badly discredited in its birthplace as it was in the totalitarian Teutonic lands he had fled. Live long enough, however, and everything returns to fashion. The Atkins diet, bell-bottoms, and even economic liberty. Hayek was born in 1899. He died in 1992. A veteran of the armies of the Emperor Franz Joseph II, he lived to witness the election of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, the fall of communism, and the triumphant renaissance of the prestige of market economics in the 1990s. It is too bad he did not endure to his 100th birthday. If he had, he would certainly have enjoyed seeing the heir to Clement Attlee campaigning for office by dropping nationalization from the British Labour Party's charter and promising an audience of City of London financiers a cut in corporate taxation. The presumption should be, Tony Blair declared a month before his 1997 election victory, that economic activity is best left to the private sector. The most important political event of the 20th century is not the crisis of capitalism, but the death of socialism. It took a certain audacity for Irving Kristol to venture that cool claim in the middle of the 1970s, not one of the brighter moments in the annals of freedom. Yet, the signs were there. Margaret Thatcher won the leadership of the British Conservatives in 1974, the same year that Friedrich Hayek won the Nobel Prize for Economics. In 1976, those same Swedes hoofed the Social Democratic Party out of office after 44 uninterrupted years of power. Milton Friedman won the Economic Nobel that year. Deng Xiaoping took power in China in 1977 and steered his country onto the road to economic modernization. Miners who have been trapped underground say that as they dig toward freedom, they can smell fresh air before they hear or see anything. So it was in the 1970s. Americans caught whiffs of more competitive, bracing economy years before it materialized. The wacky 1967 comedy The President's Analyst jovially identified the phone company, in those days there was only one, as the master conspiracy that ruled the world. The 1960s television series Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In featured a telephone operator who gleefully interrupted the calls of customers who displeased her. In 1970, a 3-minute phone call from New York to London cost about $8 in 1990s money. A hissed, "I'm calling long distance," would bring just about anyone to the phone pronto. In 1982, AT&T settled the long-running antitrust suit against it on terms that put an end to the long-distance monopoly and opened the way to competition in local phone service as well. And the telecommunications revolution roared into life. Before the 1970s, antitrust law had been used to punish companies that outcompeted their rivals. Afterward, convinced by Yale law professor Robert Bork's 1978 book, The Antitrust Paradox, most courts insisted that the one and only purpose of the law was to protect the consumer from collusion. Americans can wax nostalgic about the good old days of air travel when leggy stewardesses settled trays of sizzling filet mignons before economy-class passengers. What they forget was how expensive air tickets were then and how few people therefore flew. As of 1975, 80% of Americans had never traveled by air. Between 1950 and 1974, future Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer pointed out in 1982 the Civil Aeronautics Board had received 79 applications from companies wishing to enter the domestic scheduled airline industry. It granted none. Indeed, since 1960, only 4 of the 32 such applications have been granted a hearing. Since 1965, less than 10% of all applications by existing airlines to serve new routes had been granted, and between 1969 and 1974, fewer than 4% had been granted. The airways were deregulated in 1978, bringing Americans the airport pandemonium they hate and the $69 Super Saver fares they would not do without. Back in a minute. Thank you. Those Mexican plums on your Christmas table arrived courtesy of the deregulation of trucking in 1980, and that $14 internet stock trade was made possible by the 1975 deregulation of brokerage commissions. In August 1974, President Ford signed legislation repealing the 40-year-old ban on private ownership of gold. In 1979, Congress removed from the comptroller of the currency the power to set maximum interest rates on bank deposits. Deregulation liberated the American economy, bringing all the benefits that Hayek promised. Dynamism, creativity, low inflation, low unemployment. But like all good things, those good things came at a price. The bursting of the carapace of the old economy shattered the power of trade unions, whose restrictive practices cannot survive wide open competition. Union membership continued to grow in the 1970s. The total number of unionized workers would peak in 1978, but the cloud of unions had already begun to slip because unions were failing to recruit as quickly as the labor force grew. Slightly fewer than 25% of American workers belonged to unions in 1970. By 1978, even before the Rust Bowl Gotterdammerung of the late Carter and early Reagan years, that ratio had slipped to 22.5. In 1970, the head of the AFL-CIO was one of the half-dozen most important people in the country. Politicians and business leaders took the same care to refer to business and labor when talking about the economy as their successors 30 years later did to say he and she when talking about anything else. Who refers to business and labor today? Who can so much as name the president of the AFL-CIO? As the economy turned cooler toward unions, so did the U.S. government, their ally and protector for half a century. The Democrats elected in 1974, observes the biographer of Philip Burton, were younger, more reform-minded Democrats, many from marginal districts who defeated Republicans largely because of revulsion over Watergate. Traditional Democratic constituencies, such as organized labor, meant little to them. The Democratic tide swept into office young, college-educated suburban reformers passionately committed to affirmative action for blacks, honesty in government, equality for women, a less confrontational foreign policy, protecting the environment. It had not escaped their notice that the big labor unions were not too keen on any of those things. Individualists themselves, they had little use for the subordination of the self to the group that sustained unions. Question authority, their bumper stickers said, and they did not pause to consider how many of society's authorities were bulwarks of the Democrat Party. George McGovern had run in 1972 not only against Franklin Roosevelt's policies, his foreign policy hawkishness, his indifference to racial issues, his dislike of welfare, but also against Roosevelt's political machine. McGovern poo-pooed labor's clout. The election would test, he said, whether the union power brokers are alive or dead. The question is whether governors can any longer deliver their states. Can a mayor deliver his city? Can a union leader deliver his union? Can a priest deliver his parish? Labor richly returned to McGovern's disdain. I don't think this man is good material, AFL-CIO President George Meany said as he delivered the news that his federation could not endorse the Democratic nominee. Meany complained that a small elite of suburban types and students took over the apparatus of the Democratic Party. So, in fact, they had. What connection or sympathy could a Tom Downey, Cornell 1970, a Norman Mineta, UC Berkeley 53, a Paul Tsongas, Dartmouth 62, a Tim Worth, Harvard 61, feel for the steelworkers and policemen, the mass-attending housewives and squirrel-hunting farmers who had hitherto constituted the Democrat Party? As another 1974 freshman, Senator-elect Gary Hart of Colorado, Yale, JD 64, tersely put it, "We are not a bunch of little Hubert Humphreys." The new liberals might pity the Democrats' traditional constituencies. It was in the 1970s that the word compassion came to dominate the political vocabulary of liberalism. But they had nothing much in common with them. Truth to tell, they did not pity them very much. The New Democrats were moved by the plight of people much more abject than a union carpenter or longshoreman, welfare mothers and farm workers, the mentally retarded and unimmunized children, the illegal immigrant and the closeted homosexual. Jane Austen's Emma Woodhouse expressed their feeling well. The yeomanry are precisely the order of people with whom I feel I can have nothing to do. A degree or two lower and a creditable appearance might interest me. I might hope to be useful to their families in some way. But a farmer can need none of my help, and is therefore in one sense as much above my notice as in every other he is below it. Back in a minute. Thank you. So at the very apogee of liberal democratic political power, at a time when every plausible, semi-plausible, or even completely implausible victim group from Aleuts to Zoroastrians were collecting its bag of boodle from the open-handed Congress, organized labor, once so powerful, began to lose, and badly. Nor could labor appeal from Congress to public opinion. Public faith in unions dropped as sharply as faith in all other institutions. Between 1965 and 1975, the percentage of Americans with great confidence in unions dropped by half. The percentage with very little confidence doubled. No union forfeited public confidence more grossly than John L. Lewis's United Mine Workers. On September 6, 1973, Tony Boyle, the longtime president of the UMW, was charged with murder of an internal rival, Joseph Yablonsky, along with Yablonsky's wife and daughter. A UMW official, William Turnblazer, testified that Boyle had authorized him to pass $20,000 of union funds to a hired killer. Boyle was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. The decline of unions hastened the most marked of all changes between the American economy of mid-century and the American economy at century's end: the spreading divergence in income and wealth. From the imposition of the income tax until 1973, American society had been trending toward ever greater economic equality. Very large fortunes became gradually more rare. J. Paul Getty, probably the richest American of the 1970s, was worth between $2 and $4 billion in 1974, or not much more than 1/20th of what his fellow oil magnate John D. Rockefeller had been worth in 1914. The top 1% of American families earned 19% of the national income in 1929, but only 7.7% in 1946. Nobody was rich in 1970 in the way that hundreds of families had been rich in 1900. The upper middle's place in the scheme of things had slid too. In 1900, a college professor on a salary of $2,000 to $3,000 had to watch every penny and forego many satisfactions which he felt were the natural right of well-educated people, but he could afford a fair-sized house and at least one maid. The family of a man earning around $8,000 a year, a moderately successful lawyer, for instance, could in 1900 afford a house on the best street of Boston's Back Bay with 4 stories above the basement that contained 15 or 20 rooms plus several bathrooms and many ample-sized closets and storage rooms. That lawyer probably employed a staff of 3, a cook at perhaps $5 a week, a waitress at $3.50 a week, a laundress at $3.50 a week. The waitress and laundress shared the upstairs work. They could add the once-a-week services of a cleaning woman to come in at $1.50 a day, and also the very part-time muscle of a choreman who served several other houses at a total annual cost of perhaps $800 a year. To employ even a single full-time household worker in 1970 was, by contrast, a sign of real affluence, and a 15-room house was a luxury of the super rich. For the lower middle, by contrast, the middle years of the century were a golden age. A man born in 1920 in a rented apartment in a half-century-old walk-up tenement on Mulberry Street with one toilet in the hallway for 3 or 4 families, and who joined the New York City Sanitation Department in 1945 at $1,800 a year, could, in 1950, afford to buy a semi-detached house in Bensonhurst with 3 bedrooms and a bath. His children would all be born in hospitals, and he could look forward to a pension of $20,000 on his retirement in 1980. Back in a minute. Thank you. Statistical measures of equality are unreliable in many ways. For what they are worth, however, they show 1972 have been the most egalitarian year of the 20th century. Adjusting for inflation, a New York City sanitation worker earns no more today than he did then. His family might be better off, his wife may work, he probably has fewer children to feed, school, and clothe, but his own individual wage has not increased. And he has only done as well as that because he holds a unionized public sector job. A 30-year-old high school dropout in 1999 earned, on average, considerably less than his equivalent in 1969. A 30-year-old high school graduate earned, on average, no more. The changes in technology have enhanced the value of educated labor at the expense of the unskilled. The new immigration law tended to favor skilled labor, too, flooding the American market with new arrivals to whom a job at the minimum wage felt like a dream come true. The median income of married families in the 1990s, it should be said, has risen to a comfortable $50,000, but married families are becoming ever more atypical in America. Fewer than half of America's children will reach the age of 18 with both their father and their mother continuously present in their home. At any given moment, 1/3 of American households are female-headed, either because of divorce or because the mother never married in the first place. Meanwhile, in the upper reaches of society, wealth is blooming like dandelions in summer. America in 1998 was graced by 239 billionaires. To make the Forbes 400 list of the richest Americans required a fortune of $75 million in 1982, but $425 million in 1998. Schools for butlers were reopened, although butlers now call themselves household managers and wear khakis and an earring rather than morning coats. The upper middle, meanwhile, is again moving away from the middle and the lower middle. 8 million U.S. households earned incomes of more than $100,000 a year in 1998. 2 million earned more than $200,000. For those families, vast fields of mansions have sprouted on the outer edges of American cities, each many times larger than the Back Bay mansions of 1900, and outfitted with 3- and 4-car garages, home movie theaters, and 2,000-square-foot kitchens. The country that generated the world's first mass middle class in the middle of the 20th century has spawned a mass upper class at that century's end. And that was Hayek's prize There we go. And that was Hayek's prize from the book, How We Got Here, the 70s. Thank you. Who is the socialist? He is the man that seeks consensus. He is subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He's informal and terminally unique. He is childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He's impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He's deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He's skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, reminding you to be honest, to be smart, to be beautiful, and to remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.